Geoffrey Canada is the president of Harlem Children's Zone, an organization that seeks to build opportunities for children, family, and communities. Geoffrey's been named to the Time 100 list of most influential leaders across the world. He's been featured in a number of documentaries, TV programs, podcasts for his knowledge of comprehensive educational programming and community development. This is not a guy who just thinks inertia works. He's a change maker. Geoffrey, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time. Let me just ask you, I'm going to get off my script here for a moment. Look, our country, our communities are having a hard time. There may be another side to this thing. And I think, I know you take children's education and where they're at more seriously than almost anyone else I know. Do you worry that we're just going to bounce back to old patterns and not have learned the things we've learned from this moment? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it is my biggest fear. I've been yelling from the rooftops. We've been so desperate to get our schools open, to get ourselves vaccinated, to get our lives back to normal, that I can just hear the sigh of relief. Oh my God, thank goodness the schools are open. We're good. And we are going to be anything but good. And I just have to say, I've been an educator for 45 years, started teaching 45 years ago in Massachusetts. And I've been through some real education ups and downs. I was in Boston during busing, and I saw that horrible impact on communities of color, saw that city ripped apart, came back to New York during this whole focus on criminal justice, the crime bill, super predators, that whole thing that was just horrible for communities of color, and certainly went through sort of the Ed Wars, Leave No Child Behind, Race to the Top, all of those things. But I will tell you, I have not seen anything even coming close to what we're going to be facing today because of COVID-19, because of not just the educational challenges of huge numbers of kids missing schools, especially the poorest kids, the trauma that people are talking about that these kids are going to go through, but also because women have lost their jobs, particularly women of color have lost their jobs. People are worried about where they're going to live. We already had a crisis before this crisis. And if anybody thinks, we have to get back to the good old days, we're going to undermine the future of America. This is an all hands on deck. This is break the glass time. We've got to go and make sure that we put in place a strategy. And by the way, it's not going to be like a 6-month strategy or a year strategy. We're going to have a multi-year. We need to think 5 years to really make sure all of the gains our children lost, we've recovered those, and that kids who are at the closest end, those who are in high school, that we really make sure those young people get a chance to catch up on what they've missed during this year.
Geoffrey, I know you're friends with Randy Weingarten, who was on the show earlier, and Randy and I for years have talked about civitas, the civic engagement, the understanding, the empathy across lines in society that kind of holds it together. But if the truth is told, there was a big chunk of American society that was neglected in our civic experiment in the past. And I think, one of the interesting elements is, what are the models to break through that now? To one, solve many of the challenges that you were addressing. But I know that community schools is something, a different model of education you're working on. And I want to ask you both to help share with our audience what makes a community school, what makes it work, but also how does it address this civitas that we need to have in our society of restoring mutual concern for everyone?
So, this is, Randy and I have really been pushing to expand what's considered sort of the traditional aspects of education outside of just the traditional school walls, teachers, student, desks lined up, thinking more about how we serve the whole child and his or her family in ways that begin to rebuild these bonds of community. Look, there are huge swaths of this country that have felt totally ignored. They felt that their children don't have a chance, that their communities and schools aren't working for them, and no one's coming to rescue them. And I think, the community schools, business folks know us because of Promise Neighborhoods and this sort of cradle to career strategy we have. But we started before we got to our Harlem Children's Own strategy. We started with Beacon Schools in New York City. And what were they? They were a school that served the entire neighborhood, trying to and serve kids from kindergarten straight through till college, trying to meet the needs of that community's kids. So if kids needed additional help in the arts, it was like, great, let's give them arts. If they needed more in terms of civic involvement because they felt cut off from the body politic, we actually helped them figure out, how do you begin to advocate for yourself and for your community. If they needed help in traditional subjects of reading, math, social studies, science, we provided those instructions. This idea was that the school day didn't start and end simply when that school bell rang. But we ran that program till 10 o'clock at night, when we'd have the high school kids there. So we would keep them off the streets and engaged and under the watchful eye of caring adults, teaching them a set of skills that was going to help them navigate a world that many of them had not been introduced to. So if you hadn't been used to going outside of your 30 block area, you've never been to a Broadway play or visited a college campus and didn't know what the insides of a corporate building looked like, we were trying to open up the young person's imagination so that they could begin to see not only that these things existed, but there was a path for them to get from where they were to be comfortable in all of those surroundings. So to me, part of what we have to do is to make sure that we are reaching out to young people and giving them the kind of power and skills they need to become advocates for themselves, their families, and their communities. And we have seen what young people can do when it comes to activism. We saw that around global warming and young people taking the lead. We saw a lot of that around the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement in this country. And we think that part of what we have to teach our young people is how to be much more engaged in the body politic. Because the truth be told, when you look at what has moved this country, you look at the civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, young people were at the center of each one of those movements. And we have to make sure that they're being prepared today. And I don't see a better way than thinking about how we use school buildings to serve the community. That's a community school. How do we serve the community? And let me tell you why that school building is so important. It is usually the only place in poor communities that you can get hundreds of people in all the time. And it's built to be almost indestructible. So you don't have to worry that kids are going to be kids and they're going to throw the ball off the wall and the rest of the stuff that kids do. That's why these institutions should be serving a larger purpose than just the kids who are inside that school building from 8 to 2 or 9 to 3 or whatever the school day is.
I love the concept, Geoffrey, because it delivers in 3D form the notion that education is so much more than, a child at a desk in a building with a single teacher. There are lots of other dimensions to this. Have you been able to keep the model going in an online form during this time?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I personally have believed that technology, ed tech, is the wave of the future, even though I didn't think it was very good where it is right now. And one of the reasons is that there is no substituting a great teacher. I mean, all of us who've had a great teacher, we know the difference between great and mediocre. Part of what I am hoping is that we can find great teaching and capture it and put it online and let lots of other young people who need additional great teaching after school, weekends, holidays, summertime, actually get that great teaching. So we were already thinking about how to use online products before we had to go virtual when they closed the schools. And unlike a lot of places, we decided we were going to teach. Our school day goes from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we decided we were going to teach from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we were going to teach all subjects. So we were going to teach gym, and we were going to teach dance, and we were going to teach drawing. We're going to do all of those things remotely. And of course, there's not a handbook on this stuff. So we were trying to figure a lot of this out online. But the one thing that we found is that young people desperately need to feel like they're in a relationship with their teacher. When you think about it, up until I got to be about 13 or 14, the teacher was the smartest person I knew. I believed everything that teacher told me. They were so important in my life to tell me what I should be concerned about, what I needed to know and why. And suddenly you remove that person from a child's life in real time, that's going to have a dramatic impact on
Geoffrey,
that child. And so, it's one of the reasons Randy and I have been trying to push as hard as possible to get our schools reopened all over, and because there's no substituting for a live person. Right. You can drill skills and other things using technology, but that personal warmth, and I don't know whether you've had a teacher that you really thought really liked you, thought you were special. I mean, it changes your whole way of thinking about yourself. And great teachers make all the kids feel that way instead of just you.
I opened this show earlier today, Geoffrey, with a tribute to my high school teacher, Cindy Goodwin. She was my high school writing and literature teacher. She just passed, and I made the decision, it was COVID safe, to go to her memorial service in Texas, where she passed. And she had 140 or so students from different generations over decades who came in. And it just sort of said, wow, she made that impact on all of these lives. And in this time, COVID safe, they wanted to pay tribute to her. You can see the line. So, I mean, I totally know what you're saying. Look, I've got a not Argawal and others coming on, edX. I'm going to tell him, hey, he should, connect with you and, find those great teachers, put it online. But let me just ask you really quickly, Geoffrey, one thing you said, which is kind of haunting me at the moment, which are those students that have been impacted right now. What are your insights on how we can help them? Because, their educational experience has been damaged. They're going to be set behind others. I'd like to know from you, if you were to do 2 or 3 things that we ought to begin thinking about in addressing that time so that they're not pushed under the rug and forgotten and marginalized, what would you recommend to our viewers?
Well, the first thing is that young people are going to be worried about not just what happened, but will it happen again? When will it happen? Does this mean that when the little boy next to me has a cold and a sneeze on me, am I now going to infect other people? So what this says to me is that we have to give kids real knowledge, real facts and real information. Often people talk to kids like, they can't understand, like they won't really get it. Kids need to get this. They need to understand what happened. They need to understand how we fixed it, why we fixed it, and why they should feel confident now that we'll be prepared if it ever happens again. So that's one issue. But here's the other thing I think. We've never had in this country an incident that has impacted every single child in America. I don't care where you are. If you're in Appalachia, the same challenges. If you're on the West Coast, the East Coast, if you're a middle-class kid, you're in private school, all the kids were bombarded with a crisis that is terrifying. You might die. The air you breathe might kill you. So what does this mean? That means that we need to scale the kinds of emotional and social supports for young people so that they can begin to process this. It's not going to happen in a week or a month. This is going to take time. But you know what I think? I don't know if you remember when New York City was at the height of the epidemic and our hospitals were filled, overflowing. We couldn't find enough nurses and doctors. They actually allowed students in medical school who were due to graduate in June, they allowed them to come out of school, to come to the hospitals, and that would count as their classwork, and they would get their diplomas and get their medical licenses. We need to do that with social workers. We need to do that with psychology, master's degree students. We need to bring and bombard our schools with people who have been trained to listen, to support, to help guide children. So even as we're thinking about how we deal with the educational challenges, we've got people thinking about the social, emotional health of our young people. And then look, some people are going to think this is bad news, but we've got to think about at least an 11-month school year. There's just no way that we're going to be able to close school for the entire summer and catch poor children up. It's just not possible. I don't know any way we're going to do it. We're going to have to think about how we use time differently. We're going to think about the outside resources we need to bring into schools. We have to think about high-intensity tutoring to make sure young people are getting small group and one-to-one instruction that helps them catch up. And we have to think about doing this for the next 3 to 5 years if we're going to be serious about not building in the next generation social and educational inequality in this country.
Well, for everybody watching, I love big ideas. What you just heard was a very big idea. 11-month education, high-intensity tutoring, 3 to 5 year focus, and more. And I would call this, as I would do when we were like in a brick and mortar, that's a tweetable moment. And Dr. Geoffrey Canada, president of the Harlem Children's Zone, it's such an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing these big thoughts with us today.
Thank you for caring so much about this issue and staying on top of it.
Thank you, sir.